So hello and welcome. I'm lucky enough to have a visitor here with me in France at the moment. Chris Campbell from Canada. Chris, whereabouts exactly are you from?
I live in Sutton, Ontario, Canada.
Okay, super. And you've been here with us for a few days because basically your airline you came over with went bust, and unfortunately had to cut your trip short. But we've been here a few days and we thought it'd be just a good idea to do a little interview to basically see if there's any differences between what Chris does and what I do in Brittany and France. But first of all, I'd like to tell you that Chris is the owner and founder of HiveShare, which Chris is going to tell us a little bit about.
HiveShare is a company that I developed basically to get more hives. I had 2 and I wanted more. The following year I ended up with 20. So I offer clients to buy a share in a hive. They can buy a whole half or a quarter hive. They get all the honey, half or a quarter of the honey, and I guarantee minimum amounts, and they get more if it's a good year. So
Fantastic.
They get more than they purchased.
So in terms of capital outlay for you as a beekeeper or as a beekeeper in general, would you say that it helps spread the cost of your initial outlay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a really good way of getting hives on the ground.
Absolutely, I would recommend it for anybody. Just don't use the word hive share. But I would absolutely, you can contact me, I'll help you out, that's no problem at all. So next year I had 20 hives and they were all paid for. With a little bit extra for some medication or whatever I wanted.
See, for me, I have to, for instance, budget. So I want to put 100 hives on the ground. I've got to find the money from somewhere. And for all beekeepers, it's the same. You have to budget. You have to go to your local cooperative or your local bee group and see if there's any incentives or schemes to buy more colonies or more hives to get them on the ground. Because you don't just get them in March next year and hope you've got bees. It's 6 months or a year before you've got to plan it to get them on the ground before. And what you're saying is, with this kind of incentive, people will be basically paying up front so that know that the following year they'll have the hives and the bees.
Yeah, I usually talk to them in January, February, get the money out of them then.
Yeah.
And then I buy the hive, the actual box and the hardware, build it, paint it, and buy the bees, buy a nuke of bees and put it in.
So do you actually make your hives?
At the beginning, I bought them all. Actually, now I make them all.
Right, okay.
But I still have to make them. So there's that time, and I have to, count the numbers. They don't get a specific hive. If they come to the colonies, I do tours for free. I invite people anytime to come to my apiaries, and I'll show them for free. But they don't have a specific hive that's theirs.
Okay.
They have one of the hives. So if they have a full share, they get 20 liters of honey from the apiary, not a specific hive. Not specific
to their hives. I find that difficult as well, because when I pay my clients in honey for renting a place at the different apiary sites that they own, they always ask, "Oh, is it honey from my hives?" I said, "Well, no, it's from the pool of honey."
Exactly.
It's so difficult and so time-consuming to individually extract honey from that individual area, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And if their hive died for whatever reason, or got tipped over by a bear or whatever, then that's no fun.
So immediately, have you enjoyed seeing our brown bears here?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah,
all of them. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So first of all, the thing Chris picked up on when he came here was he asked me about my winters, and he was astounded about the amount of snow we have, and astounded about the frost we have. I can't even believe how cold the winters are. So I follow Ian Stepler, Stepler Farms in Canada. And I see the winters they have there, so it's exactly the same for you, isn't it?
Pretty much
exactly. You are slightly further south?
I'm in southern Ontario, it's a little warmer, probably a little damper.
Yeah.
He's got a great operation going, but I'm much smaller, but the weather is more up and down. I think his is relatively consistent, but he, as you know, boards them inside, and that's brilliant.
And you put all your hives outside for the whole winter?
They don't move.
They don't move,
They don't move.
Well, I'm exactly the same. Mine don't move either.
Right.
Yeah.
I used to wrap them all the time. It would just carry on. I used to wrap them. I don't wrap them anymore. You do what you want. You do whatever's good for you. I've decided not to wrap them.
Yeah.
And I have the exact same losses, which is about 9–10%.
Yeah. And have you found some years as more and some years as less, or it's generally about the same?
I'm pretty close. I've been doing it for 6 years only, and they've been pretty consistent every year. And usually it's my fault. Okay, every time it's my fault. I've done something wrong. I haven't medicated enough. I haven't left enough bees in the box so that they can have the numbers, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I take it personally, so each time I open up a hive, it's like, oh, what have I done?
But this is the thing about us beekeepers, we're all learning.
Yeah.
And I feel exactly the same when you make a mistake or you put a colony, for instance, to bed with the wrong number of bees or you haven't built it up properly, you know when you've done that wrong. And the majority of bees I find, and you agreed with me before, the majority of times they die is because of our own fault. It's not the bees, it's generally something that we've done that we haven't put into place for them.
And each year, we theoretically get a little bit wiser and a little bit better.
Yeah. The thing for me is I have learned from a lot of people, like talking to yourself, but I've kind of gone into it perhaps a bit awkwardly in some respects, where I've taken that jump perhaps a bit sooner than I perhaps wanted to, but I had to do that because I had no real choice because of my specific setup and my specific work commitments. I couldn't do anything but either go for it now or have another year of being absolutely messed around and so frustrated. So I've gone to 200 hives and I had 30% losses last winter, whereas you've probably maybe a lesson learned there is I did go into it too quickly too soon. But I know the reason why I had winter losses was because I didn't have my varroa treatments in time. I had old genetics. I had a really severe winter with very severe, how can you say, highs and lows, which was not normal for this area. And other beekeepers had an awful lot more losses than I had. So I actually found it wasn't too bad.
Let me just jump in there. Severe winter is all relative.
Yeah, it is.
It's all relative. So these bees are not used to the cold from Canada. So it is all relative. So these bees, it is severe winter. My severe winter could be -40, and then we get a week of maybe -10 and sunshine, and they come out flying, and then it goes back to -30.
Yeah, yeah.
That can easily kill a colony.
Yeah. Well, what I found interesting was when you said you had a period in March where the weather went mild and the bees were flying. You thought, great, that's it, we're through the winter, yippee!
Right.
2 days later, you're back to -10, and the bees are suddenly chilled. See, we don't have that here.
Right. But you have other things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, generally we have a lot of damp here, a lot of moisture, and I think the last winter a lot of colonies suffered because we had continuous rain and continuous damp and continuous wind. So the bees were quite active because it was never that cold, but when these bees get through the winter, they're handing a baton over to the new bees the queen's making in the spring, and already those bees are compromised. They're weaker than they should have been, and they've been struggling to keep warm the whole winter because of the severe dampness. Other winters we've had, for example, here, when we get it cold and dry, our bees are in a lovely tight cluster, and they seem to go even colder. They seem to go even more motionless. They seem to go even more comatose, or how do you say, shut down. But when we have mild weather, as everyone seems to think these days, that the mild is probably worse because they're probably working too hard and they're still a bit busy and they're not completely shut down. Now, everyone knows there's different research been done and all that kind of thing about this, but when you speak to people who have colonies in North America, Canada, their colonies are stone cold dead. When you have a cold winter and a normal winter for you, it's cold and dry, and we're all saying now that cold and dry is better than cold and wet.
Yeah, it's totally
and I would
fine.
love that here, but we don't have that because we have the influence of the southwesterly fly. But this is why it's so interesting to meet people like yourself, because you can discuss these things and you can really learn so much. I mean, what would you say in terms of hives management and hive sizes, the kind of thing that we do differently here that has immediately come over across to you that you think, wow, that's different? Have you found anything that you would say is hugely different?
There's a lot of little things that are different. The shape of the hives, the size of the hives, they're all different.
Yeah, because you use Langstroth, don't you, in where you are?
All that's my choice.
But that's Langstroth deep.
Correct.
Yeah, and your brood boxes are slightly shallower than my Daedon, aren't they?
Right.
Okay, yeah,
That's
fine.
correct.
But would you prefer a single brood box management strategy for your general management of?
That's what I do.
That's what you do, right?
I would say the majority of beekeepers in Canada use a double.
Right.
I've chosen to use a single. I'm happy with my choice.
Is that a double? Sorry, excuse me, interrupt. Is that a double shallow or medium, or double medium, or a double deep?
One deep.
One deep, but no, for you, but other beekeepers.
Double deep.
Double deeps.
Double deep.
Okay.
That's the normal.
Right.
That's almost the recommended, if there is such a thing, for beginners.
Okay.
To use a double deep.
Right.
And get 100 pounds of honey to get them through the winter.
Okay.
As we all know in beekeeping, there's many ways to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Some ways are proven and are better for certain reasons. Doesn't stop you from trying something new. I would encourage people to try something new. Just don't go too crazy or you might kill your colonies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things I did notice here is the bottom boards are plastic. I haven't seen this in North America. It doesn't mean it's not there. I haven't seen it. I think it's brilliant. The moisture doesn't collect in the wood. Ours are mostly wood.
Yeah.
This is obviously screened, which is great as well. I use all screen bottom boards. I pull out the slide that you use to check mites, and I leave it out.
Yeah.
All year round.
See, that there is a big debate amongst a lot of UK beekeepers and European beekeepers about whether you should leave the bottom boards open or closed, or whether bottom boards with screen bottoms make any difference at all.
Right.
But the beauty of this is I feel that we do have a degree of help when there's some ventilation and it's cold and dry. There's no issue. When it's cold and wet, and say January, February, I generally tend to slide in my bottom board in here into this part. So I like to think that if I get any cold winds in January, February, when the queen's starting to think about brooding, there's less chance of any gusty air going up there. And if that colony is slightly compromised for whatever reason, there's less chance of damage occurring if we have a cold spell. However, it's so open and so variable. I mean, you know, the great thing, obviously, that mites do fall through here, so you can put your screen in there. The other thing is, when I'm using oxalic acid, I can screen off the bottom and it shuts off those ventilation bases, so it's sealed. That is the beauty of it, and you can wash these in bleach or in caustic soda. If you do have a disease issue, you're not sure whether it's disease, you can just say, well, I can wash it, it's no problem. You blowtorch the hive. But I mean, this is made by Nico, and they do of feeders. They make the white plastic feeders just there. They make the full hive feeders. They do a fantastic range of stuff, as well as all the queen rearing equipment. But I've never gone to the plastic hives themselves. I just can't get my head around it. I don't know what it is. I just love the wood. So all my hives I buy are wood, and I tend to buy mine because for us here we have a very difficult problem in getting cheap wood to make into hives. And it's actually cheaper for us to go to a beekeeping company that makes just hives and have them made to exactly how we want, but we'll get 50 or 100, and that's what I've done as I built my numbers up. So, but we combine the two. We can have these great bases. And then and when you're commercial or you're professional, you get these at a really cheap price. I mean, literally €6 or €7 each. So it's to have something that's non-rot, that is never going to rot. You'll probably have 2 hives on here in its lifetime, or you might never ever break this.
Right.
I couldn't say whether they don't go brittle after 20 or 30 years, because I haven't had them that long. I've only had them, say, 9 years now. I mean, but for me, for beekeeping, this has revolutionised. Well, not revolutionised beekeeping, but it's made our beekeeping a lot different here. But maybe in Canada, if you had this same thing, it might be too brittle in the cold. And it may crack, because I mean, -40 is pretty damn cold.
But we're not moving them at that time of year.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the other thing, you know. So there's always these considerations to think about.
I do want to remember to say that we have a vent in the top of our beehives.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you should. I mean, the air has to get out. A little chimney, as some people call it. You have to let the air out. That's the whole way they survive in the wintertime. They excrete their breath just like us. It's got moisture in it. If it collects in the hive, it rains, it drops down on them, and that's what kills them, obviously, just like us.
Yeah.
So that air has to get out.
Yeah. So, see, for us here, we don't have a chimney, but what we work on is there's some air coming around the base, and we have a really good insulation. Same as all UK beekeepers, and a lot in France, we have just a really good, I haven't got any here to hand, but we have a good styrofoam insulation. Plus we have, we cover the hives with equipment such as this. You know, we call this, it's like an aluminium foil, but it's actually insulated. So we use that. But what we really work to achieve is a zero humidity zone that would collect there and then drip onto the bees. As we've discussed already, we all find that cold and dry is better, but you have to have that insulation at the top so that no warm air does come up and then hit that cold surface, because the surface is never technically cold, it's always insulated, you know. Yeah. So I mean, what is your just do a little bit of timings for us. How does that compare with us here in Brittany?
The bees start to get going. Every year is different, obviously, but sometime in April.
Okay.
We often put pollen paddies on in March or April.
That's another thing we can talk about in a minute.
Okay, and then to kickstart them, we might get a flow in May.
Yeah.
Maybe not, depends where you are. And then we go crazy. Now, the other thing that is different between this particular region and where I live is we pretty much have something blooming the whole season, all spring, all summer, and into fall. Not all the time, but 90% of the time. Whereas here, it goes in fits and starts, right?
Well, I've spoke to you, for us, we have, and I'll just remind people out there who don't know, for us here in Brittany, it's a very diverse area and diverse pollens, but we start off in about, in a good year, you can start off the first week of March with the initial inspections if the weather's nice. And sometimes it's 14, 15 degrees, calm weather, a southerly flow from North Italy, Spain, the warm air, we call it a Spanish plume. This air comes up and you can get in your hives. So you get through all your hives, you can see what levels of food there's in. But then obviously, like a lot of springs, it's up and down for a while and it's never perfect. I mean, who wants it to be perfect? Anyway, you need rain, you need weather, you need different systems coming through to give you that rain so the ground's wet for the first flow. But so we have that, generally we can get into our hives sometimes the first week in March and generally in March. But even then, what we say is, for our nukes, as you well know, the first, second week of April is the most critical. But then once you're into April, May, then the flow starts. After the second 2 weeks of April or the third week of April at the push, you're safe. There's nothing to feed. And then we have our main flow from mid to late April to late May. Then we have a gap, but we call that the June gap, but it comes last week of May, well, second, third week of May, and then it lasts till the first week of June. And then from basically around the middle of June to the middle of July is our chestnut flow. And then there's our dearth, and we have nothing, whereas you have basically flowers all the way through. And then you have your goldenrod.
We do, but I don't want to imply that it's utopia. We do have dearth from time to time, and it is pretty obvious. And it's nice to put out a barrel feeder if you can. But we do have.
Is that an open feeder?
Open feeder, yeah. Put some straw on the top so you don't drown. But we do have something at the end, and there's calendula or mustard or. Because
you don't seem to have ivy here, do you?
Not as much.
Because you have a better thing, I think. You have the goldenrod, which can be prolific, can't it?
It's everywhere.
So we don't have that. I mean, I've got some goldenrod here, as you've seen in my garden, and we put a clump in, and it stays a clump. But we think it's like asters here. We don't have asters. Asters don't do well here, and I think it's because of the climate zone that they don't get that deep cold, and they don't seem to stratify their seeds. And I know I've asked about goldenrod when I visited North America, and it seems there's a lot of, I think it's up to 10 or 12 varieties of goldenrod that actually are present all the time, so that's why you have such a long flow of it. And when I was in Vermont, I saw that the flow started sort of third week of July there and went through right through August, whereas we're still in dearth then. So there's actually, even though if you look at the world and the climate zone we're in, or sorry, the geographical line we're in, we're actually very close to your geographical line. But because I think you're in the continent and you get very cold in the spring, you start a little bit later, but we can sometimes start earlier, but not always. Some years we're mid-May. If in an extreme, when we have a very cold easterly flow, we get that cold easterly flow off Russia, the whole of Europe is freezing, and we are stuck in it, and we can't do anything till second, third week of May. This year was very nearly like that, but we had a little bit of heat for the first and second week of May, So our nukes were still growing, we were still trying to feed when it was cold, but it wasn't quite that bad. But it can happen. But you were saying it's so variable. But generally, we are doing beekeeping in. By the time we get to the second week of April, it's full on. It's taken off. But you seem to have a couple of weeks after. Yeah.
And I close up early. It was just close them all up, and that's why I'm here. I'm able to come here because everything's closed up. I've taken my honey, my supers off. I've processed my honey. I've medicated. I can leave them alone. I'll medicate again when I go back, but
do you like using the traditional Varroa treatments? How do you monitor your Varroa? Do you do sugar shakes, or do you believe in alcohol wash? What do you prefer?
I believe in the alcohol wash.
Okay.
I did the sugar shakes, and because I felt bad, I don't feel they're as accurate, frankly.
Okay.
And I want to get accuracy. Now, I've heard some people that they do the alcohol wash before, and then they treat accordingly. I think a little differently. I just treat everything because you're not going to treat less. It's not you can put less of the.
I tend to agree with you. I think that treating after your treatment, alcohol wash after your treatment is certainly a must because at least you want to know what you're going into the winter with.
You may need to treat again.
Exactly, but we can do it here because we have, like you have a broodless period, and I think your broodless period might come a little bit earlier than ours because I've looked in hives last week, and this is a general thing we have. We still have brood being made because we have such a strong ivy flow. We have a lot of bees being made now, but to be honest, by mid-November the queen stops laying, so we get a broodless period in December. and we can use vaporized oxalic acid. Then you can use a dribble, which has become very popular, but obviously it's only a one-off treatment, the dribble, and it's got to be exactly the right time. But by that time, we're hoping that our mite numbers are so low, all we're doing is mopping up just the last few mites. We like to hit, to avoid that crossover, we like to get our varroa treatments in our hive or oxalic treatment started as soon as you pulled your honey off, the minute you have, because then, but the problem is it's so difficult to do that then, because you're so busy thinking about making splits, thinking about raising your last load of queens, thinking about, it's just,
if you can pull the honey off and put the medication in, put the top on, and you're good.
But it's just so difficult to do that.
It is, it totally is.
And the practicalities, I'm discovering the practicalities of being a professional beaker are, sometimes you just have to accept that things aren't going to get done when you want them. It's so difficult and so frustrating, but it's
especially when we're one person and their colonies keep
Well, that's why you're here now.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't go away now anywhere in the North Circle. I can't go anywhere to see other beekeepers until December.
Right.
Sorry, until October, November, until they finish their beekeeping. But I can go south, I can go to Australia, I can go to New Zealand, I can go anywhere south in the winter, which is absolutely fantastic, to be honest. So it gives us the opportunity. You know, so that's a really interesting thing, because they're all the same. You ask a beekeeper in Europe to come and visit you, and they go, I can't possibly come until October, November. You know, it's we have a period for about 2 weeks in the summer when we could come, when our flow is virtually finished, so we put all our supers on, and then you could come then, because there's not much to really do. But at the same time, you think, hang on a minute, if I go away, I'm going to have no cell builder set up, so I've got another 2 weeks before I get that ready. And when you get into queen rearing, that is the issue.
Yeah, if they're doing all that. If they're just have hives that make honey or for fun, then they can leave.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, different setup for sure.
Okay, great. So we talked a little bit about pollen paddies before. We don't use them here at all, and it's very interesting. I mean, obviously I've mentioned Ian Stepler before, but he uses them with vigor, and he opens the colonies. But I think I know what, I'm not saying why he does it, but I know that when your thaw comes in and you get that first couple of weeks of the bees flying, I looked around at the scenery in North Canada. From what I could deduce, there is nothing for your bees out, because it's been so severely cold that it takes that couple of weeks before everything opens. Whereas here, we sometimes have pollen coming in on Boxing Day, but not a lot, but we have bees that will forage. And if there's gorse, which you felt today, nice prickly gorse, I'm trying to run him through all the things that that he likes, that I feel he should sense when he's in France to get the experience. I managed to push him into a gorse bush today, so that he really felt what gorse is like, you know. We have gorse that comes into flower, and that's got a very high level of protein in the pollen. Nice. So the minute you get a day, the bees will start foraging. But generally, when things start to fly in March, they're on the pollen. Now, that's just to say as well, for us specifically here in this region, that doesn't mean there's nectar. What I said before about nukes taking off, we have to monitor on, the hives generally are okay because they've got plenty of stores, but our nukes in early spring are the most critical thing here. And I think you said the same, that is the same for you, because you've got a strong queen on a beautiful setup with 5-6 frames of bees and brood, and she is just motoring. She knows that the sun is coming up and the days are getting longer, and she's just using the stores that's there. There might be a bit of pollen coming in, excuse me, and for us there probably is a bit of pollen coming in.
But we make sure they have lots of pollen, so
so you get the pollen sub.
Stimulate the queen.
But we don't need to, because there's always pollen coming in. And in October, now, we've got pollen coming in like you would not believe.
It's like crazy here.
It's like crazy. But that might only last 2 weeks, but there'll be enough in those 2 weeks.
For sure.
To pack that colony for, and then they'll shut down, because in mid-November, the temperature drops to like between 5 and 8 degrees for the rest of the winter, and obviously sometimes colder over the winter, sometimes snow, sometimes just frost, but it drops after they've got that last pollen in, and the bees are clean, and then they overwinter. But for you get into that spring, and you've got to force that protein in, otherwise they will probably just stagnate. They probably wouldn't do anything, would you think?
It'd be super slow start.
You
probably wouldn't have any honey in the spring.
Really?
It would be really slow. It would just be like a slow build up.
Yeah.
Instead of giving them the opportunity, here's some pollen girls, go crazy. And they take it all in, and you know, sometimes
Did you have to monitor the feed levels as well? Do you stick your hive tool in sometimes just as a test to see what comes up, if there's honey on it, or if they need feed, monitor the weight?
We try not to open the hive a whole lot, obviously if it's cold, and we pollen paddy in, you know, or you have a look, and you know, but you try not to let that heat get out too much. And we put the pollen paddy in on the warmest day we can.
Okay.
But it really makes a big difference.
Yeah.
It really
How would you say about making your own pollen patches? Would you say give it a go? Would you say actually the ones you can buy are probably really good as well? How do you feel about that?
We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I would recommend that you try it yourself.
Yeah.
As I did, and my bees did not take them. I haven't found a formula that works yet. But the ones that I buy, they just gobble down. So terrific. But they take a little bit more, they cost more. But I'm into trying things myself. I'd rather be self-sufficient. I'd rather do everything myself than have to buy everything and be reliant on going to a bee supply store. As wonderful as they are, haven't met one that's not wonderful. They're all great people.
Yeah.
But if you can make it yourself and add in your secret ingredient, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would prefer that.
I think in every area where I've visited so far, and it's not that many places, I've met beekeepers who've all got their own recipes that they find that work. I mean, I've heard one, for instance, in the UK that there's people that use pitted dates to help get them to eat up, to really get stuck into the pollen sub. But there again, other people just use the standard one they buy it in bulk, they cut slabs off it, on it goes, push it on, and when you look underneath, you know, seeing the videos, they're all just there eating it and taking it down, you know.
Yeah, I think I need to say that there's a big difference between backyard beekeepers and professional beekeepers or people that have like 50 or so hives. There's a big difference. For example, I might use a lot of plastic frames because they're cheaper, because I need a lot of them.
Yeah.
Or I might build them myself because I can build them for very cheap and it's kind of therapeutic and I like doing it. Rather than the backyard beekeeper might buy the really nice wooden ones with beeswax foundation. Great, go for it. It just doesn't make sense for me to buy those. They're too expensive, and when you have that many hives or 200 hives, it doesn't make sense at all.
No.
So there are people that are listening to this video and realizing that they've got 2 hives and they're totally into it, and maybe they'll have 5 or 6 or 10 next year. Awesome.
Probably 20, because you know how us beekeepers think.
Yeah, really. but there's quantities of price breaks as you get bigger, and you have to think about that. So when you're buying hives, you're buying like 200 at a time. You're not going to buy the really nice ones. No. You're going to buy good ones that are functional and last a long time.
Yeah. Well, you've developed your honeys for yourself. What is your strategy for selling your product? Obviously, you're bound by your contract to look after the people who take on, and you do very well. And what you tell me is really good, because people really appreciate the fact they pay into this share, and then they really enjoy having that honey, and it's always delivered.
Yep.
But what's your kind of thinking on developing your products?
Well, I've developed some infused honeys.
Okay.
I like that. I like doing something different. I'm not that big that I can put my colony somewhere and get heather honey or lavender honey yet, which I would like to do.
Yeah.
But I just don't have the manpower or the numbers or, frankly, the time to put them there and take the supers off when that flow is done.
Yeah.
So I have gone a little bit different. I have infused honeys. So I infuse them with chipotle, smoke,
right.
chocolate.
Yeah, the chocolate, I have to say, is pretty awesome. It's like, Chris said to me just before, can you taste the honey? I said, there isn't any, is there? That's the joke. But it's absolutely delicious, you know, it's like...
So those have gone crazy, and I'm really happy with that.
Did you find you don't have enough honey, to be honest?
This year was pretty good, so I have enough honey this year.
At the level you are now, but as you get bigger, perhaps you're
Well,
gonna...
it's already ticking away that next year I'm going up to at least 70 colonies.
Yeah.
I have to.
Well, it's similar for me, because this morning we took some honey to the big honey distribution area. I sold a barrel of honey this morning because I had another barrel I'm going to put into pots, and I've sold another 2 barrels already. And our flows aren't very big, as I've explained, but I'm also making nukes. But for me, it's sensible to create some cash flow right now for me, but the other honey I'll sell over the winter in my new pots that I'm bringing on my new label, so I'm starting to develop that. But it's really interesting to meet Chris, to hear how he's done his development into the honey world, into the marketing world. Because don't forget, getting honey from a hive and putting it in a barrel is one thing. But putting it in pots and marketing it is completely different. It's like...
Because we all know our honey is the best honey.
Every beekeeper's honey is the best honey in the world. I said to Chris, you wouldn't like mine, but I know yours is the best honey, but as far as I'm concerned, mine's the best honey in the world. You know what I mean?
So that's what I thought of years ago, and I thought, I have to have something that's different. Yeah. This is just me. This is just the way I think. I wanted something different. I wanted something that no one else had.
Yeah.
So several of my products, I know no one else has them. Some of them they do, and I get people all the time asking me to make cinnamon honey. I haven't made it yet.
What are your most biggest requests? Is it the cinnamon?
That's the request. I haven't made it
okay.
yet. They're not my biggest sellers, clearly, because I don't have them.
Okay.
And honey butter. So there's
honey butter.
There's two for beekeepers out there. Make honey butter and cinnamon honey. You probably have a good thing. Creamed honey I don't make.
No.
That's another big request. And some of my friends back home make creamed honey. It's excellent. I've chosen not to. Okay. But I make other things, and I make things with the wax, and I try to introduce propolis into my stuff, and maybe even royal jelly in the future.
Fantastic.
I want to use the whole hive. I want to use it all. I don't want to waste anything. You know, we would all not like any bees to die in the process, but we do our best. But that happens. We're farmers.
We are, absolutely.
Yeah. But I wanted to do, as we've talked, is to put something on the market that no one else has. Your neighbor's honey probably tastes pretty similar to yours. Sorry for the newsflash, but it's probably pretty similar. So if you can market it differently, if you could package it differently, if you can add something to it that no one else does, put it in a nicer bottle, those they all matter. We eat with our eyes. All those things matter. Yeah.
Well, I can only thank you for that. I have to say that because Chris has been here with me visiting my apiaries and spending time with me, and we've had a great time here, I've learned so much, and it's opened my mind to, now I'm at this level of expanding into the next phase. I kind of like, oh my God, I've got to try that, and I want to try that, and I'm like, I'm almost lost in the clouds. But I've got the winter now to have a reflection and to start thinking on the next projects, you know.
Yes, and I've learned a lot from Richard too. It's been wonderful being here. I've learned a lot about queen rearing and nukes and different types of equipment.
He's not yawning now. But of an evening, I'm talking about queen rearing. Well, you want to see the size of his yawns, I tell you.
The brain's still working. I'm just tired, you know, jet lag.
You're very kind, don't worry. One other question I want to ask you. In terms of support for your business and your beekeeping venture in where you are in your particular part of the world, what kind of support do you get from the government? Is there any support there? Do they actively promote discounted products so that you can buy an extra 20 hives or 50 hives? Or do you have bee inspectors that follow you around every year to help you if you have a problem? What scale of help do you get?
We don't get any help that I'm aware of. I could be mistaken, but I'm not aware of any help from the government other than plans and legislation that do help us. There's no financial help that I'm aware of. I could be wrong. Yeah. We do have bee inspectors. They're provincial bee inspectors that are free to us, that can come around regularly and do drop in if we have American foul brood as opposed to European foul brood. Yeah. They'll come in and take a look and let us know, mark the hive if we're not there. And of course we burn it, get rid of it. Yeah. And they're great. And they're all the ones I've met have been super people, and they're concerned about the welfare of the bees. And they'll call a spade, and they'll say, you know, you're doing a great job, or you could do better, or.
But they are supportive.
Yeah, they're all wonderfully supportive.
Thing, you know?
Yeah, they're
that's
great.
The thing you want. So.
And find a mentor, get people to help you, volunteer in other people's apiaries. I've flown across the ocean to come and see Richard. I mean, I'm going to see another beekeeper in Portugal next. To me, this is what you should do. We all can't afford it. That's just life. Yep. But go to your friend, you know, down the road and talk to them.
Absolutely.
Everyone has different ways to do it. Everyone has different ideas. Join a bee club. Go online. Yeah. Keep in mind that you take in all this information, and then you have to decide what you're going to do. Don't necessarily do exactly what someone else does. We talked earlier about how we could do exactly the same thing and have totally different results. So you have to do what you think is right based on the information that you've learned. Yeah. That's sort of how it works. Yeah. That's the part I love about it, because I can do something different, or I can add, I don't know, banana peels on the top of my hive, and the bees are wonderfully productive. That's a total lie. I have no idea about that. Go for it. Tell me
you know, bananas can stop chalk brood, don't you? Everybody knows that.
Oh yeah, that's a given.
You know. Anyway, Chris, just finish off by thanking you for coming here. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you to stay, and I know you're off tomorrow morning to Portugal. just in on the Beekeeper there. So, you know, great. I look forward to meeting you again in the future, and don't ever hesitate to come over. You know, it's been fantastic. But, you know, I hope the next time your airline doesn't go bust before you're supposed to come over, so you actually have time to get in some hives with me. But you know, we kind of really have we've gone through a lot, haven't we, in the last couple of days? So
it's been fantastic.
We've eaten a lot, we've drunk a lot, you know. I even got Chris on chocolate eclairs this morning, and he hated them, absolutely hated them.
Choked it down.
Choked it down. Forced it down. You know,
steak tartare.
Yeah.
Local beer. Yeah. It's awful.
Yeah.
Don't come. It's terrible.
Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll be in touch. Take care. Bye for now.